Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel, TechStrong TV for today, Thursday, June 4th. Hey, this is the day we've been pointing to since we started TechStrong TV almost 10 weeks ago now. And that is our virtual conference. TechStrong Con is today. It actually kicked off about a half hour ago on at TechStrongCon.com. You can register and still join. I think there are slots available. So we're not going to do our regular show today. Instead, what I'm going to do is one of the keynotes that I really loved from today's event is my friend EMMET KEEFFE III from Insight Partners. And EMMET just did a great presentation based upon his, polling his network and his friends and in the industry and portfolio companies about what are the kind of tech projects that we're doing right now. Which ones are being accelerated, which ones are being depreciated, and which ones are kind of just hanging there, right? We're all worried about, are we still spending money on tech? Are we going to have our jobs? EMMET answers a lot of these questions with his presentation. So as a bonus, we're going to play EMMET's keynote here on TechStrong TV immediately right now once I finish. And then after EMMET's keynotes, we're going to play a series of just 3-minute snippets of some of the other we have about 50 speakers on TechStrong.com. We're going to play 3-minute snippets of some of the other speakers that we have. And I'm going to ask all of you, though, if you like what you see or if you want to see more, head over to TechStrongCon.com, register. You'll immediately get a pass into the environment. Go check out. There's 4 different tracks playing all day. There's 30 sponsors. There's all kinds of exhibit booths and giveaways and prizes and just group chats and networking opportunity. Check it out. It's TechStrongCon.com. We hope to see you there. But for now, here's EMMET KEEFFE. And after EMMET, as I said, we're going to show some snippets of a lot of the other speakers. I hope to see you over at TechStrong Con, everyone. And I'll see you tomorrow on TechStrong TV. Have a great day.
Greetings from Somerset, England. My name is EMMET KEEFFE, and I'm an operating partner at Insight Partners and the founder of a program called Insight Ignite, which is a digital acceleration program. Since the crisis hit in early March, I've been doing about 10 interviews per week with global IT leaders, a mixture of CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, CDOs, trying to get a pulse on exactly what's going on in the market from an IT perspective. And it's been an absolutely fascinating 10 or 11 weeks. What's been most noteworthy is every single week, something different is on the mind of the market. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've observed over the last few months. And also I'm going to close with my thoughts about what we may be facing in the medium term. So thank you very much for joining us. What's really interesting, and this we saw right away, almost in week 1, maybe week 2, it became clear that the digital threat landscape was going to be transformed by this crisis. We were hearing this across all industries, that consumer behavior was changing overnight. And a good friend of mine, Robert Walcott, who is affiliated with Northwestern University and also the University of Chicago, wrote a piece in Forbes right away, pointing out that now is really the time that global companies have to cross the digital Rubicon. And his view is that in the next 5 years, we're going to know who's going to make it across. I wrote a thought leadership piece in 2018 called The Theater of Digital. And my point of view over the last couple of years is, much of what we saw in the market around incubators and accelerators and corporate venturing and foosball tables and bold statements and everything that was going on from a digital standpoint, from my point of view, was largely theater. And that's because global companies were constrained by the public markets. They had to grow revenue, they had to grow profit, they couldn't really reduce headcount, they couldn't shut down legacy stores. They were just basically stuck and were not able to get across this digital chasm, as I call it. Well, those barriers have all now been broken, and Robert pointed that out in the very beginning. So this is what we've seen over the last 10 weeks. In the very beginning, it was an almost overnight transformation into the home and just making sure that the organization was set up from a resilience standpoint. So that was the very beginning. The next thing that most IT leaders looked at is, can I reduce any of my IT budget quickly? And very fast, contractors were reduced, consultants were reduced, not necessarily a material reduction in costs, but wherever possible, those costs were cut. The next thing that we began to see was this digital threat landscape transforming, and basically all customer-facing digital projects were going ahead at full speed. I actually spoke with a CIO at a large retailer, and he said that the CEO was screaming at the top of his lungs, just saying, put the throttle down on any project that's digital and customer facing. So those projects went ahead right away. Very quickly, we started to hear that the cyber security threat landscape had also been transformed. Obviously, for organizations that have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people working in the home, that completely changed the threat landscape. So we also heard that all cyber projects were going ahead, and even some additional funding for cyber was being released. In the beginning, it seemed that maybe data was going to take a back seat, and that many innovation-related data projects were going to get put on hold. But as we moved into the medium term, we started to hear that actually data was going to remain a critical topic. And in the recent few weeks, I would actually, if I was going to update this slide on the right-hand side, I would say that data is now green. I think organizations have figured out that there's really a big opportunity to leverage data to drive innovation. And what's also been interesting is we're hearing a lot about the fact that many of the regulations and compliance around data may be reconsidered as we exit the immediate crisis. So I think we may see sort of a loosening on some of the compliance restrictions around data. And then the last thing we heard is that most kind of non-business critical, longer term strategic transformational programs were being put on hold. I heard from a CIO at another retailer, they had a 3-year SAP initiative that they decided to put on hold for a couple of years. So I think many departmental and kind of non-digital projects have been put on hold, may be released in the medium term, but at the moment they're on hold. The other thing we've heard, which is interesting, and I'll talk later about why this is important, I think a lot of CIOs have been very frustrated by the lack of ability to cut costs on the keep the lights on side of the budget. Most organizations are still spending 80% of their IT budget on the sort of run the business or keep the lights on component. And as they tried to find opportunities to reduce cost over the last few months, they found that there were just a lot of restrictions there, especially as resilience was a major focus in the boardroom. Sort of adding risk to resilience, was not something that organizations could tolerate. So very hard to reduce that keep the lights on budget. The other thing we're hearing is that there's a really intense focus right now on next generation collaboration tools. So organizations are looking at, beyond Zoom and Teams and what's available today in the market, what are some next generation tools that we can put in place? And then on the right-hand side here, on the innovation side of the budget, I think many very forward-looking innovation projects are currently being put on hold. We heard from a head of innovation at a large energy company who said that many of the businesses they've spun up in their innovation lab, even though they're generating 2 million or 5 million or 10 million a year in revenue, were basically deemed non-strategic and put on hold just because against a 20 or $30 billion budget, it's just not material. And then the green boxes there, these are all the customer-facing projects that are going ahead at full speed. And then on the lower side there, you see a lot of these big departmental projects that are being put on hold. So this whole digital revolution is fascinating, and it's interesting. There's a Chinese symbol for crisis that basically says it's a time of danger and a time of opportunity. And I think that's where we are at this very moment. And what's been fascinating over the last couple of months is the speed of digital change has accelerated, I think, beyond anyone's wildest imagination. I've had leaders tell me that, quote unquote, we've accomplished more in the last 3 weeks than we did in the previous 5 years. I've heard IT leaders saying that IT truly has a seat in the boardroom now, and the CIO at that particular organization is on daily stand-up calls with all the business leaders talking about the business and how to survive and how to thrive. I heard a really interesting story at a global bank who was thinking about Teams for the last 24 months, and lots of arguments internally about the fact that it wasn't quote unquote secure, or it wasn't scalable, it wasn't going to make sense, it wasn't going to work. But then in 16 days, they were able to get it out to several 100,000 desktops, which was really a major eye-opener for the CEO, who's now asking, okay, how do we do that on all transformational projects going forward? So very, very interesting time from an innovation standpoint. So over the last several weeks here, this is really what organizations have been doing. And where we are now at this very moment is, I think organizations are assessing, what are we going to do in the medium term? What's our work from home strategy going to be? Many organizations are analyzing productivity. We heard from a medium-sized bank that has about 80,000 employees that they've determined there's been a 20% uplift in productivity during this work from home period. And so they're contemplating a significant shift in their workplace as we move back to the next normal. Organizations are also assessing, are we going to leave 20% of our employee base in the home, 30%, 50%? I actually heard a fascinating case a couple of weeks ago. An organization with 30,000 employees is contemplating leaving 70% of their employees in the home. So that's really where most organizations are now, is preparing for the next normal and what the workplace is going to look like. And that's why many of these collaboration tools are coming into focus. So, during this period, we've noticed that there are some themes that are emerging. And I've put some of them down here. Remote business management, next generation endpoint protection, next generation customer engagement, lots of thinking about automation. How are we going to reduce costs? Next generation employee engagement and employee experience, business agility and product agility. And there's been an acute focus on accelerating delivery of software projects. So I think we're going to see a lot of glass being broken around Agile, DevOps, Cloud, which I'll be happy to speak about during the Q&A section. Even though Agile and DevOps and Cloud have been household names for a long time, there was still a lot of waterfall in place before the crisis. And I think a lot of that glass is going to be broken. So where we are now is we're going to enter a really interesting period. And one, there's kind of three big questions that I have. One is, how do we sustain this level of digital change? How do we avoid falling back into the old ways? We had a virtual roundtable yesterday, and a CIO was on the line who said, he and his colleagues have been talking in the back channel, and everyone's very concerned that they're going to fall back as we head into the medium term. So that's a really big question. How do we maintain that sustainable change? The second thing that I think we're going to see in the medium term, and I'm working on a thought leadership piece, it's called the death of the pendulum. I think we're going to see that there's going to be an acute focus on cost reduction, and really there aren't going to be any sacred cows. So process, traditional organization, legacy applications, everything that we know in the past is going to be on the table, and organizations are going to be cutting very aggressively cost. But at the exact same time, they're going to have to innovate at a very different pace. And we're going to need to move into what I call innovation 2.0 or 3.0. And because of this digital threat landscape transformation, organizations are going to have to innovate at a different pace. And then, the last big question, and this is one that I don't have an answer for, that I'm going to be continuing to ask for the next year or longer. And that is, really, how do you innovate inside of a large organization? Does it make sense to set up an entrepreneur in residence program? Where are you going to source the talent? How are you going to identify the problems that need to be solved? How are you going to develop a point of view on the timing as to whether or not now is the right time to solve that problem. When does it make sense to spin out an idea into a company? So this whole innovation topic, I think, is going to be really important. And I don't have any answers for it yet, but we're going to be investigating to try and get to the bottom of what does the next level of innovation look like. So with that, this is what we're seeing in the market right now, and I appreciate everyone's time.
Emmett, thank you for just a great presentation. You know, no pun intended, but the insight that you provided with those just a few short slides in your commentary were extremely valuable. I am sitting here thinking I want to share this with many of my entrepreneur friends and CEOs of startups who I'm interviewing every day, and I mean, they'd find this so valuable. But let's continue. Thank you. Let's continue now. You know, riffing off of the presentation, and I've got some questions prepared. They're broken into several areas. The first is on digital transformation, and it's quite interesting that the digital threat landscape has been disrupted across all industries. Can you share a few stories that you've heard about how organizations are accelerating digital change?
Absolutely, and as I mentioned in my presentation, I've been talking to about 10 global companies a week. They've been across all industries. You know, one interesting story was from one of the world's largest automotive businesses. They had launched a digital dealer platform about 5 years ago. And I think it took them 5 years to get 3,000 dealers onto that platform. The minute the crisis hit, they had an additional 1,000 dealerships come onto the platform in 2 weeks. So it's an example of just the disruption there. I talked in my keynote about a global bank that we were talking to about their Microsoft Teams implementation. They were sort of stuck for a couple of years to get that implementation done. But when the crisis hit, in 16 days, they were able to roll it out to several 100,000 homes. Talked to another leader who works at a very large German parts supplier business, who talked about the fact that overnight they were able to transform all of their leadership calls and all of their board meetings into a virtual workplace environment. And they found it to be equally energized and you know, same exact sort of collaboration that they had when they were meeting in person. And then another interesting story that we heard, I've actually spoken with several CIOs from large retailers and CPG businesses. They've seen an absolute explosion in their digital revenue streams and digital products and services. One CIO in the US, which is from one of the largest retailers, said that overnight, I mean, they've seen a 5x growth in revenue and activity in their digital channel. And all of their projects are moving ahead at full speed and even being accelerated, because any concern that they had about you know, native tech businesses like Amazon are going to be heightened just based on the transformation that we saw in the crisis. So across every industry, just tons of digital change going on right now. And as I mentioned in my presentation, I've heard over and over again that we've gotten more change done in the last few weeks than we have in the previous several years. So the pace of change has accelerated dramatically.
Absolutely. Emmett, as we exit this immediate crisis mode, what's your biggest concern for global companies?
I'm really concerned about sustaining this level of change. I mean, as you know, I run a program called Insight Ignite, which is a digital acceleration program. And how we think about it is we want to help global companies get across this digital chasm. We want them down the road to be digital native type businesses, right? If I'm a traditional retailer, I've got to look a lot more like Amazon in the future. If I'm a traditional automotive maker, I've got to look more like Uber and more like Tesla in the future. You know, if I'm a bank, I have to be a digital bank in the future. So really what gets us excited at Ignite and what we're all about is helping these organizations get across this digital chasm. And one of my biggest concerns is, how do we sustain this level of change? How do we keep this mindset as we go into the medium term? I'm a former entrepreneur. I was a CEO of a DevOps business for 17 years before joining the private equity world. And I've been through 3 major crisis moments. One was just a a revenue crisis where we lost a very big customer and almost destroyed our business. And the second one was the dot-com bubble bursting, and the third one was the banking crisis. And as I thought back to those times, I realized that some of the most innovative and game-changing things that we did happened during that time of crisis. And I think that's what organizations are finding now. And the big question is, how do you maintain that mindset? Maybe it's not a crisis mindset, but how do you sustain this level of change is my biggest concern.
I can't agree more. That's also my experience. I lived through 2 of those 3 myself. From an IT spending perspective, what do you expect that we'll see in the medium term?
I think we're going to see a lot of glass being broken. I'll give you a couple examples from our portfolio. We invested in a business that you know well called Tricentis, which is automating manual software testing, right? And I've talked to many IT leaders over the past few years that are spending 100 million, 200 million. I even talked to one that was spending 500 million on manual software testing. And during the good times, even if there was an opportunity to reduce the cost by 50% or 70%, the organization wasn't willing to do it. There was too much process change, too much people change. The vendors weren't interested in seeing their revenue go out the window. So it was hard to drive through some of that people and process change. But I think in this new environment, those types of opportunities are going to be on the table, and that glass is going to get broken. Same thing if you look at a traditional machine data platform like Splunk. There's many players out there that are spending big money on Splunk, tens of millions and beyond. And again, we invested in a business called Devo, which is a next generation cloud native machine data platform that is basically much higher performant, much more scalable, and 10 cents on the dollar. During the good times, we had a really hard time getting some organizations to adopt that platform, but now I think it's going to happen. So I think in the medium term, there's going to be heavy cost reduction. Many of the legacy applications are finally going to be retired. But I also think in the medium term, there's going to be a heavy throttling up on innovation investment because organizations have to get across this chasm. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think we've ever seen a period like this before where both these things have to happen in parallel.
Excellent. If you don't mind, I'd like to transition now over to DevSecOps, which is, again, as you mentioned in your slide, and we've never seen cybersecurity under this kind of spotlight. But what are you hearing about the pace of change over the past few months when it comes to DevSecOps?
Well, before the crisis, I think what I found really interesting about the cloud, for example, I think it's set the world record for being in the hype curve the longest, right? It probably started in 1998 with Salesforce, and it's been in the hype curve ever since. And, if a CIO goes into a boardroom and the board member asks, hey, how are we doing with the cloud adoption? The answer has been great. It's going great. We've signed our deal with AWS. I'm mandating everything has to be in the cloud. But the reality is that organizations hadn't really made that much progress on the cloud, right? They haven't made that much progress on DevOps. There's still lots and lots of waterfall in organizations. And I think what has happened over the last 3 months is a lot of that glass has been broken. We had a board member from a large water company who attended one of our roundtables, and she said that they made their agile transformation overnight. In the several years leading up to the crisis, they were just stuck in waterfall. But she said overnight, we completely transformed into an agile shop. And I asked her, why is that? And she said, because we had to. There were a bunch of digital products that they had to get out within a few weeks, and they just figured it out. I heard from another CTO at a large oil and gas company who said that basically all waterfall projects have been put on hold because they're deemed to be higher risk than agile projects. So I think we're going to see a tremendous amount of change and acceleration around Agile DevOps Cloud. One thing I think is going to need to get solved, and we had a CIO from a large retailer talk at one of our events recently, and he said there are some collaboration tools that they're going to need in order to do Agile effectively in the work from home environment. So I think, there's a great opportunity for entrepreneurs that are building next generation collaboration tools, but I think we're going to see big acceleration there.
Agreed. Do you expect to see traditional people and process barriers being removed given the new mandate for development velocity?
I do. I mean, I I was talking to a IT leader from a large German company, and as you probably know, process is really a core competence of German companies. And he said basically there will not be a single process that will not be under consideration for change, right? Whether it's a business process, whether it's a technology process, organizations are going to have to cut costs, and if it means changing process, they will. So I think we'll see an unprecedented amount of change, which is great because many of these legacy systems need to be retired. And if organizations are going to get more agile and develop more digital products and services, a lot of this stuff has to go away. So I think it's going to be painful, but it's positive.
Fantastic. I'd like to focus in now specifically on cyber threats. I mean, as part of this, larger cyber or DevSecOps conversation. Given that the cyber threat landscape has been transformed, which problems do you see global companies focused on solving at this moment?
Yeah, so we had the good fortune as a firm of making an acquisition right before the crisis in a business called Armis, which is protecting agentless devices. I think one of the things that large global companies are getting very concerned about is understanding how many devices do they actually have in their organization. It's very common that an organization might think they have 1 or 2 million devices, but after having an assessment from a platform like Armis, they may find that we have 10 million devices, right? So I think organizations are working very hard right now to sort of determine exactly how many of these devices that we have, ones that run software, ones that don't run software, and then how do we protect that whole IoT infrastructure? So that's a big topic right now. Another one is, just next generation endpoint protection. We invested in a business called SentinelOne, which is a next gen platform, and organizations are rethinking, now that we have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of devices in the home, how are we going to secure those? The other thing I'm hearing a lot about recently is threat detection and really kind of understanding the threat landscape. We acquired a business called Recorded Future that basically leverages AI in a very sophisticated platform to kind of listen to chatter in the dark web and in many of the corners of the world. And I spoke with a CTO at a telco who said that the chatter is really fairly frightening what's going on right now because there's such an opportunity for the bad actors. So, and he also shared with me that they think there's going to be an unprecedented number of breaches happening this summer and into the fall. So I think threat intelligence is a big issue. Third-party risk is reemerging as a major topic. And also organizations are getting concerned about insider threats, right? There's organizations are concerned about mental well-being, and there's many employees that are sort of unhappy. There's organizations that are having to reduce headcount. So insider threat is emerging as a topic.
Absolutely. Thank you. Next, what can we expect to see from a cyber spend standpoint in the medium term? Not immediately, but in the medium term.
I mean, everyone that I've talked to has said it's moving ahead at full speed and probably will be even further accelerated. So I think it's going to remain a very hot area, and spending will increase there.
Agreed. Okay, if you don't mind, Emmett, the last category I wanted to kind of touch on with you, and that's emerging technology, which is again a theme of our TechStrong conference, as is digital transformation and DevSecOps. Emerging technology, given that Insight Partners is a growth investor, which trends have emerged over the past few months, even before COVID, that you see continuing or accelerating during this and beyond?
So we recently finished investing out of our 10th fund, which happened over the previous few years, and many of the investments there were cloud related. So cloud native security, cloud native data, cloud native privacy, many kind of cloud management and security tools. We also made a lot of investments in CI/CD pipeline tools and also CI/CD backplane. So clearly, accelerating delivery was a big topic before the crisis. We also have made several investments in the data space, data reconciliation, for example. I talked about the next generation machine data platform. We've invested in some kind of AI tools for, it's a sort of a Tableau disruptor. So I'd say lots of horizontal data tools. We also invested in a very fast-growing data privacy business called OneTrust that's helping organizations manage all the complexity around data compliance. In the past few months, what's emerging as a mega topic is collaboration. So I think that'll be a big topic as we go into the future. Telemedicine has emerged as a very important new category. We've made an investment recently there. I'd say digital health in general is going to emerge. FinTech was the first major industry category that emerged for us, and also EdTech. But now I think digital health is going to be next. And we're also seeing a lot of new fast-growing businesses in the pharmaceutical business. So I think we'll see some tech being pointed there as well.
Absolutely. Emmett, I don't have any other questions, but I'd like to give you the last word. A conclusion for our audience, or if you have anything that we feel we haven't covered.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been a very tragic time, and unfortunately it's going to be very, very challenging in the months and years ahead. So I think we're gonna be in a tough place as a world. So I don't want to under appreciate that. But having said that, I think sometimes light comes from darkness. We actually had a adventure mountaineer yesterday speak at one of our events, and he talked about in some of his very darkest moments, he found light. And I think that's what we're going to find. And we're going to see a lot of automation, a lot of digital change, a lot of new exciting products and services. I mean, the world is definitely going to be a better place. I think also another word that I'm hearing a lot more about is purpose. I think many organizations are going to find purpose. Many executives are going to find purpose. I think more and more people are going to kind of get to the bottom of what am I inspired by and what do I want to do to make this world a better place. So I think that'll be another outcome of this crisis.
Excellent. Emmett Keeffe, thanks for presenting here at TechStrong Con today. Be well and stay strong and healthy, and we'll speak to you soon. Emmett Keeffe, Insight Partners, Insight Ignite.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Chen-Si Wang, and I'm very happy to be here speaking to you today. I'm the general partner for Rain Capital. We are a cyber-focused venture fund, woman-run venture fund. I'm here sitting in Silicon Valley in my backyard during this COVID sheltering in place. But what's interesting is our activities have not slowed down. We continue to invest, continue to talk to many entrepreneurs. And today I am speaking to you on a subject that is very much near and dear to my heart. It's security and DevOps, and which also happens to be an area that I'm looking at very actively to make investment decisions in. So I got interested in this area several years ago when the whole containers and Docker technology became very popular. So I go to a lot of developer meetups, and at that time, since 2015, Docker meetups were everywhere in Silicon Valley. And so I started looking into this technology. I'm like, what is it? Why is everybody so in love with Docker? And really got to know this modern development methods where developers are allowed much more freedom to make operational decisions beyond just the makeup of software. They can put together configurations which dictate how things are run in the operational environment, and you can push a button and have the containers developed on your desktop to immediately run in the cloud, in AWS, without much of a testing and configuration change, and which was really a game changer. And starting from that point on, I became really interested in security for DevOps, or you could say DevSecOps today. And I continue to do research in this area, and also a lot of thinking about what could be the next phase of building security in to enable DevOps at a larger scale and enable more secure development happening within the modern code development organization. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about that.
Hi, my name's Liz Rice. I look after open source engineering at AQUA Security, and AQUA Security helps enterprises. We have products to help enterprises with securing their cloud native deployments. I'm also involved with the CNCF. I chair the technical oversight committee of the CNCF. And so I'm pretty embedded in the world of cloud native and containers. And today I wanted to talk about container images, and in particular why small container images are a really good thing. If we're going to talk about why small container images are good, it's a good idea if we dive into what we find inside a container image in the first place. Then we can talk about why small images are better and how you can go about making your images smaller than perhaps they are today. So, what's inside a container image? I'm going to guess that most of you have some familiarity with using tools like Docker to run containers. So you're used to the idea of Docker pull to get hold of an image that you can then run. Inside that container image, there's basically two sets of information. There's a root file system and some configuration information. When you run a container based on that container image, the root file system populates the file system that you can see from inside the container. So if you're running a container and you look in root using something like ls, you'd see the set of directories and files that came from that container image root file system.
So many ways to start getting into this new programming field, to start understanding how the physics work, how these machines work. And what we really want to do today is kind of break it down for you and hopefully leave you with a sense of empowerment that you can go forth today, use some of the free tools we mentioned, use some of the resources we mentioned, and actually get started playing with quantum computing. So with that, I want to jump right into it. I believe that this, not artificial intelligence, is the space race of our generation. That is to say that I don't believe that you can have artificial intelligence without some form of non-von Neumann architecture, and I believe quantum computing will be a big part of that. If you look at the amount of money over the last 5-10 years that countries have been pouring into this, tens of billions of dollars in China and Sweden and the US, everywhere around the world, Japan, France, anywhere you can name, then you kind of start to understand why this kind of computing is so important and why we need to be spending more time educating people earlier on this new technology. But again, I think this is the space race of our generation. This will shift global power. It will change the way everything from stocks are traded to drugs are discovered. So it's incredibly important that we focus on this technology. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this talk for the next 20 or so minutes. So what is quantum computing again? Worley, you just rambled and you said all that stuff and you didn't tell us what it is. Well, one of the easiest ways to explain it is with a coin. So I have this coin here, and I have a tails, and I have a heads. And so imagine that classical computing, your iPhone, your iPad, your computer you use every day, even high performance computes in very large data centers, these things are all driven by a binary von Neumann architecture, meaning that if I take that coin, I place it on a flat surface, if it's heads up, it's a 1. If it's tails up, it's a 0. And on that flat surface, it can only be in one of those two states. So think of that kind of like the binary state and function of classical computing. And now imagine that with quantum computing, I take that same coin and I flip it in the air. And when I flip that coin in the air, then at the apex, is it a heads or is it a tails? And the fact is that it's in a superposition as it's spinning of both heads and tails. And so if you think about that, then you can start to understand how qubits work. And the science of qubits is pretty simple. You basically have a 2-level mechanical system. It allows for that superposition we just described with that coin. And that means that we can measure probabilistic outcomes. And so therefore, a qubit can be, think of it like a block sphere spinning, and it can be in a straight up 1 or down 0.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this talk. We're going to talk to you about DevOps at scale, the Greek tragedy in 3 acts.
DevOps and Greek tragedy has a lot of in common. I think the most important one is what you expect of it. Everybody dies.
That's right. The traditional Greek tragedy, everybody has to die at the end, and ours, well, maybe slightly different. We are in North America. After all, we do like happy endings here.
We'll get to it. We'll get to it. Let's dig into the prologue, and we'll talk, the usual stuff like introductions.
So my name is Leonid Igolnik. I am an engineering executive. I had the joy of running engineering for a number of SaaS products at companies like Taleo and Oracle, and most recently run engineering in one of the vendors in the DevOps space, in the monitoring space or the observability space, company called SignalFX, where we were helping companies on their journey towards more modern, more repeatable and more reliable software delivery model, leveraging the cloud.
And I'm Baruch Sadogursky. I work for a company called JFrog. You probably heard about stuff like Artifactory and JFrog X-Ray. Those are all tooling in the DevOps world as well. I'm head of DevOps advocacy there, and what it means that I'm doing this. You should find us on Twitter, and Leonid Igolnik is at Igolnik on Twitter.
And Baruch is at jbaruch.
And next is the most important slide of today's talk, and this is jfrog.com/show notes. If you go there, you will find a special page for TechStrong conference in the top of the page. On this page, you will find those slides. You will find this video. You will find all the links. Everything that we are going to mention will be there as well. A place to comment, to rate this talk, and very, very attractive raffle that you should join. Now, the convenient thing about this link is it's simple. You can always remember it, and it is in the bottom of each and every slide,
right there.
Oh,
there,
the technology is amazing. Okay,
there,
it's right there. So jfrog.com/show notes, and also, by the way, our Twitter handles are there as well, in case you decide to follow us, and you really should.
In case you have a question that you want to ask us on Twitter.
Well, you will have to follow us. That's exactly my point. All right.
So let's start. Let's start by defining what the hell the DevOps is. And because Greek loved Venn diagrams, we have a Venn diagram for you, right?
So if you're not familiar with DevOps Institute, I really am delighted to introduce you. Our mission is to advance the humans of DevOps, and we do that by equipping those humans with what we call SKIL, skills, knowledge, ideas, and learning. And we do that by accrediting and orchestrating SKIL through our certifications, through our research, We have learning opportunities. We do monthly virtual conferences. And then I think most importantly, we really try to connect the community, the very global community, to each other. So I invite you to become a member of the DevOps Institute community. It is free. So go up to our website, www.devopsinstitute.com, and you can become a member and start enjoying some of those benefits today.
As we look in today's situation, there's a lot of studies being conducted, data being reported. Monster just reported recently that the top 3 hires that are in demand right now, of course, are frontline healthcare workers, trucking, delivery drivers. Number 3, software engineers. People are investing in software. People are increasing their investment in software. So while we may be shedding jobs, doing furloughs, et cetera, in some areas, software is hot, and it's going to remain hot as we move forward. So here's some things that I would look at anticipating as we continue through this process. And I'm no better predictor of the future than anyone else, maybe worse. But you can certainly listen to some of the best sources and minds that are trying to figure this out. And I know there's a lot of talk about the rapid rebound of our economy, sort of this the V-shaped recovery. Some people call it more like the Nike swoosh. Like we'll be back in the end of the year, first part of next year, things will be all back to where they were. Well, I kind of doubt that that's going to happen. Not because I'm a pessimist, but first of all, recoveries have always, at least throughout my career, taken much longer than 6 months to recover. I mean, these are things that take a few years, if not multiple, to fully really get back. There's a lot of discussion about the idea of a zigzag recovery or a W-shaped recovery, something that's more like a rolling series of slowdowns, recessions, recoveries, et cetera. And a lot of this is, of course, because of the unknown and the dynamic around the pandemic and the unprecedented nature of it and unpredictability. I mean, we're going to have probably flare-ups and hotspots, may have even heightened contagion areas that have had a ramp up of infections. Certainly that's been predicted by Dr. Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. He's certainly more knowledgeable about it than I am. And it makes sense as you look at kind of the behavior of virus and what folks think that will do. It's more likely that we may be in a fall or winter kind of situation where there's increase, maybe even because of the current protests and things that are happening in cities around the country today could also lead to some reinfections and hotspots. I mean, we certainly hope not, but hopefully with the use of PPE, that's helping. But we hope we don't have those, but it's very possible we will, maybe even likely that we will. This whether it's fall, winter, or things that happen, hotspots from the protests.
At CLOUDBEES, we work with customers across a variety of industries. In fact, roughly 50% of the Fortune 100 companies partner with CLOUDBEES. And we're continually talking to the people in these organizations to find out what their biggest pains are, their biggest challenges, and how we might better help them. I learn a lot in those discussions, and I found that whatever industry they're in, they have a lot of very similar problems. And those are problems that I suspect many of you here today also have. No matter what their product or service model is, it's clear that every business has to deal with the challenges of going digital. Whether they build cars, publish books, manage money, or like a recent conversation I've had, process poultry in Jamaica, their new reality is that they have to transform, either partially or fully, into being a software-driven company. At minimum, they have to develop competency in developing and delivering software if they have any hope of competing in today's market. And what we found is that for companies that have to navigate this tricky road, there are 3 main challenges they have in common. 1, they need to be able to drive innovation quickly, or they'll get left in the dust, like you get passed on the freeway by that speed racer. 2, in doing that, they can't compromise security, stability, or otherwise introduce risk. 3, to accomplish the first 2, they have to be continually optimizing development and delivery across their organization to remove manual error-prone processes. Worrying about accomplishing these 3 things is keeping the partners we talk to up at night. And if you're like me, it's probably keeping you up too. The reality is that these companies face complexity. Developing and delivering software is hard. Doing it consistently, rapidly, and reliably is logically even harder. Here's an example of a development and release workflow. It's a process map that takes us from ideation to production or concept to customer. This could represent just one mature multi-tier application. In the enterprise, we're usually talking about multiple teams working on multiple projects with multiple technologies across multiple functional groups, and it all has to happen simultaneously. At that level, man, it gets complicated. And as adoption grows and the organizations scale up, these processes, teams, and tools multiply. As the number of teams grow, so do the number of problems. That's just like a standard law of physics. Many of you know exactly what I'm talking about, and I'm confident in that because it's not that uncommon at all. But the secret to success lies in embracing that complexity and managing it better. So if scale and complexity are just features of our road ahead on our drive, what are the causes of these potholes, hairpin turns, and detours that we have to navigate?
Hello and welcome to the TechStrong conference, and thank you for joining me in this challenging time. We as technologists have to stay together no matter what's going on in the world, and thanks to our technology, we really can. We have the opportunity of just working from anywhere. My name is ROSALIND RADCLIFFE, and I'm an IBM Distinguished Engineer. And today I'd like to talk to you about making your dinosaur dance to the tune of your digital transformation. And I know it might sound a little strange to have an IBMer saying making your dinosaur dance, but when I was thinking about this session, I thought about Lou Gerstner and his making the elephant dance of IBM. And I thought in today's world, that might be just the right message to bring. We really need to bring the systems that we're using, the systems of record, the IBM Z that is so heavily dependent on across the industries, to bring it into this digital world. We're hearing so much about COBOL right now, and COBOL being the problem. I want to talk about and show how it's not that COBOL is the problem. It's really that we technologists need to recognize that ZOS and the IBM Z is the most modern system out there, and we should be using it for what it provides. Take advantage of the abilities that it has, the security, the reliability, the performance characteristics, and not hide it behind that green screen that you might know. In IBM, I'm responsible for driving the DevOpsable nature of ZOS, but I really spend my time working with clients and helping them on this digital transformation, helping them bring DevOps into their world, including IBM Z. And so today I want to talk to you about what we've done, what's available, and try and show you the cloud native development environment for ZOS. It might surprise you a little. I want to start with DevOps. And when we talk about DevOps, I think we really mean biz, dev, sec, QA, inf, ops. It really is that bringing together of the entire organization. but that doesn't work for Twitter. So we call it DevOps or DevSecOps. And when we think about it, we need to make sure we're thinking about it from all of our systems perspectives. And when we talk about DevOps, we generally think about cloud native development. We think about those digital businesses that started out on the cloud. We don't necessarily think of those back-end systems of record. And so I want to talk about how it really does apply no matter what you're building for.
So what's common? What's common across all of these, right? And there are many, many definitions of digital transformation, right? I mean, you know, the more studies and blog posts one looks at and research papers one looks at, the more various combinations on definitions of digital strategy, digital transformation one finds. But digital transformation tends to focus in three different areas from a business perspective. You're either trying to digitize and improve your customer experience and your operational processes and look for new business models. At the end of the day, that is a good summary of the goals most digital transformation efforts are trying to achieve. From the technology side, the way you adopt these, the way you get on that journey of digital transformation is by doing application modernization, getting off those legacy systems to new modern, more lean and agile systems, adopting the cloud. That's become a pathway to digital transformation because now you have access to all the cloud services and the agility and the elasticity and the compute power and the reach which cloud brings you. And of late, you know, there's been the whole focus on data science and AI and machine learning, which allows you to do something with all the data you have. As you are digitizing, you're actually getting more data. And how do you get insights from that data, right? It all comes from the data science and the AI and machine learning efforts one is hearing about and which companies are embarking upon. What is common across all six of these, whether you look at it from the business axis or from the technology axis, the common factor, in my opinion, is data. And the common stumbling block is also data. And you know, here's some other quotes I have, which I found while having conversations with clients or talking to other organizations which were looking into the same area. Here's Rob Roy from Sprint, the Chief Data Officer of Sprint, saying, getting better data is key to eliminating the unknowns of digital transformation. He's not talking about the data which the digital transformation will impact. He's talking about the data you need to know in order to do digital transformation. So, you know, it's kind of a inception style recursive thing here. But at the end of the day, it's data. Here's a quote from from Arvind Krishna, who's now the CEO of IBM. But when this quote came out, which was around a year ago, he was the senior vice president running cloud and cognitive at IBM. So that was pretty much the bottom layer from IBM, right? On my graphic here, application modernization, cloud adoption, and data science, AI, machine learning. He owned it. And here is a statement he made during an interview with the Wall Street Journal. And I highly encourage you to go read the whole article because there's much more to it than this soundbite I've put here. And he was being asked why all these AI projects, which IBM had been involved in since the origins of Watson, why were they halting or being canceled? And he was being challenged on that. And he said, it's data-related challenges is the number one reason. Now that's painting it with a very broad brush. What data-related challenges, right? And I'll talk about my opinion of those. And it is painted a little bit by what Arvind talked about. But I think it's also just one side of the coin. Saying data-related challenges seems to imply it's a technology challenge. In my opinion, it's more than technology. It's actually a cultural challenge about how most large enterprises treat data and how they don't have an enterprise strategy on how to treat data like a true product. And here's a recent one. Actually, I was just reading the current issue of The Economist, and they were talking about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. We are recording this, obviously, having this in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And essentially what they are observing is that all these data-enabled services are even in more aspects of our life, right? Students, like my daughter and son who used to go to school and college, they're doing it online. And there's more and more data being gathered and analyzed about what they're doing and not doing than it ever used to be. And we are seeing that across our lives as we become all remote. I mean, look at this conference. We are not in person. We are doing it remote, and we know who's on right now, and we can look at some of the data. We'll obviously do it in a very privacy compliant way, but any conference today online has much more data about what all the people who are attending the conference are doing and not doing than one used to have in in traditional on-prem conferences. On-prem, you know what I mean.